once again. Merry Christmas, everyone. This past year, a friend of mine recommended to me a novel. And he didn't just recommend it to me, he handed me the book, and I read it. It was called All the Light We Cannot See. Has anyone read this novel? Oh, quite a few people. And some of you may know that Netflix released this last month as a mini-series, and, well, I just got to say it's not that good. Well, at least it's not as good as the book. That usually is what happens. Though the novel was published in 2014 and won the 2015 Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And it's set during the Second World War, that very dark time in human history, and tells the story of a young French woman who's blind and her connections with a young German soldier. It's actually a great story, but it's also a reflection at a deeper level on the nature of good and evil and about the question of hope in a time of darkness. There's a line that's repeated throughout the book, a line that connects many of the characters, and the line is this, quote, "The most important light is the light you cannot see." Now, this is a reference to the physical nature of light, but it's also, of course, a metaphor. Now, for you budding physics geeks, any physics geeks in the church today? Well, yeah, I know Joe is. Well, you know that light, the fundamental definition of light, is that it is electromagnetic radiation. Did you know that? We're all being radiated right now by electromagnetic stuff. And this radiation, most of it, this light, most of it is invisible to the human eye. We can't actually see it. In fact, I have a little schematic here. Now, I know you can't see the specifics, but it's just for visual impact. The bar at the top shows you the total range of frequencies of light. And the little colored section, the little very thin colored section, that's the light we can see. All the other light, we can't see it. And at the immediate edges of the light we can see is, of course, we've heard of it, ultraviolet light. We've all heard of that. And we've heard of infrared light. Infrared light. Say that 5 times in a row quickly. Now, this is not meant to be a physics lesson, but let's just say that there's always more light than we can see. In our first reading tonight, we heard from the prophet Isaiah, giving his people a message of hope. We hear these words, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shone." Such a powerful image. People who walk in darkness, especially if you've ever had to walk in darkness. And I don't know about you, but as I reflect on this past year, it feels to me like we've been walking through darkness, through deep darkness. The continuation of the war in Ukraine, the suffering of thousands of innocents through the terrible events of October 7th, and the consequent destruction in Gaza, the political division throughout the world that's been exacerbated, division that's spilled over into families, into nations, even division in our church. And in the midst of all of this division, people seem to be losing their capacity to even talk to one another. We hear about the tensions between Taiwan and China and Houthi rebels firing rockets at ships and whispers about World War III. We hear of record inflation, soaring house prices, and environmental catastrophe. And just this past week, we heard of the mass shooting in Prague. I mean, of all places, are you kidding me? Prague? In addition to the endless list of almost daily mass shootings in the United States, it can be all very overwhelming. The darkness of our times is a is truly a deep darkness. And I can't help but think, like, didn't we learn anything from the bloodbath of the 20th century? It can be overwhelming, and we can feel despair knocking on the doors of our hearts as hope seems to slip out during this dark night. And maybe you're here tonight thinking, well, this is not much of a homily. I came here to get cheered up. But maybe like me, because I've been really wrestling with this. Daniel agrees with me. Daniel, thanks for your support. Jesus came 2,000 years ago. This great light came into the world. How come if he makes a difference, he doesn't seem to make a difference? How come we're still so messed up? So perhaps the primary person I'm preaching this homily for tonight is me, because I need to wrestle with this as well. You see, the light is there, but sometimes it seems so weak, so inadequate compared to the darkness that surrounds us. I know that, I'm sure this is an issue that many of you are struggling with as well. And the truth is that it's complicated, isn't it? There is no simplistic or quick solutions. I think of the words of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was a Russian writer and prominent critic of Soviet Russia and the communist system. And during the Second World War, he wrote a criticism of Joseph Stalin in a letter, a personal letter he wrote to a friend. And he got arrested for it and sent to basically a Soviet concentration camp. They called them gulags. He spent 8 years in a gulag. And when he got out, his writings became known in the West, and he helped to shine light on some of the real injustices that were inherent in the Soviet system. Well, he once said this, and listen to these words, they're quite profound. If only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Here's the truth of the matter. The darkness is not just out there. The darkness is also in here. We glimpse it in our own flashes of selfishness, anger, and pride. We experience it every time we treat another human being as a means to an end, even in the most subtle of ways. Every time we give into our biological hardwiring for self-preservation. And most bitter of all, we experience it when we find ourselves unable to do the good that we truly desire to do. I mean, has that ever happened to you? You really want to do something, to be a particular kind of person, to be in a particular way, and you mess it up? Has that ever happened to anyone here? A few of us. Yeah, right. The rest of you are liars. Sorry. How about this one? When we truly don't want to do something and we end up doing it. Can anyone relate to that? A few of us. So, what can we do? What can we do about all this darkness that surrounds us? Well, one obvious thing, perhaps, is to limit our exposure to the so-called news. You see, no generation has ever had to digest the entire bad news of the world over breakfast. And the bad news is only a part of the story of humanity. I mean, I don't know, but it seems to me that for every bad news story, there's got to be at least 4 or 5 great news stories, but they don't make the headlines. So we're not getting all the story. Constant bombardment with only the bad news is a distortion. And it can be overwhelming and can make us forget that there is more light than we can actually see. Some of us may be able to have a positive impact on public life in some way, but most of us are very limited in our influence, but with one exception. We all have the ability to influence what's in here. You see, what we celebrate at Christmas is that God became one of us to win our hearts. God became one of us to win our hearts. That ancient battleground where the war between good and evil rages. Jesus doesn't want to be remembered as a mythical or even a mere historical person, but as the living God who wants to speak to hearts, who does speak to our hearts. His heart speaking to our hearts. And the heart of the matter of what we celebrate tonight is that the heart of God, which took flesh at Christmas, was pierced for our sake on Good Friday. And that heart is speaking to our hearts, especially hearts that are fearful, overwhelmed, and losing hope. The Lord whispers to us tonight, to each of us, don't be afraid. There's more light than you can see. Open your heart to me because my heart stands open to you. In our first reading tonight, the prophet Isaiah proclaimed these now famous words, "For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom." Well, this is it. His authority grows continuously, but only in one place, in human hearts, in our hearts. As his authority grows in our lives, his everlasting kingdom and the peace that flows from it will become manifest. If we accept his authority, he will not destroy our hearts, but will transform them. As the prophet Ezekiel said, he will remove from our bodies the hearts of stone and give us a heart of flesh. And this simply means that he'll make us human. He'll make us fully human, fully alive, capable of walking in darkness, even deep darkness, but keeping our eyes on the great light that we can see while knowing that there is even more light that we cannot see.